CRUD where?
CRUD where?
Yeah, CRUD, like, what is it interacting with? So Rails through Active Record, the code you write interacts with what?
The database.
The database, yeah, okay. So Active Record gives us a way of interacting with the database. But other than that, it's the same as any other Ruby object. Okay. So plain old Ruby object, Poro, you'll see that every once in a while. Other than the Active Record extension, it's just a Ruby object. Even with the Active Record extension, it's just a Ruby object. It's just we're not looking at the code that's being pulled in. Who is familiar with the concept of inheritance in classes? Have you ever heard that term before? I'm going to try to explain it.
I kind of like think an easy way to think about it is like a parent and a child. So if you start off with a parent may have some attributes about them, and they might also have some functionality, some methods about them. If a child inherits from its parent, it can inherits those attributes and objects. So then, like, now the child has access to those same methods and attributes.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to do a quick example of that in a minute, what that looks like on our own. It's really great, and it'll sort of blow your mind at first, and then you'll start to understand why that's useful over time, and it's going to be a really powerful tool. So there's two primary types of programming frameworks that are used nowadays. One is an object-oriented framework, which is very much uses things like inheritance, and we'll go into what that is in more detail. The other type is what's called functional programming. The difference really is about whether you're creating a bunch of static methods or a bunch of instance methods on your classes. So who can remind me what static versus instance methods are?
Static method is more like something that's probably going to be done to like multiple different things. And then an instance method is like a method that has to be enacted on an object that was already instantiated.
Okay. So which of these two methods is a static method?
The dot self one is a static method, and then the say goodbye has to be called by an object that's already instantiated, so that's an instance method.
Okay. So somebody else, how do I call say hello to everyone? If I go into the Rails console, how would I do what's inside of say hello to everyone?
You say person dot say hello to everyone.
Yep. How would I call say goodbye?
You have to create a new person first, and then you could say person dot new dot say goodbye, I guess.
Yep. Person dot new dot say goodbye. So the difference is that, and this is what happens in functional versus object-oriented programming. In functional programming, you call the function, but you don't have access to any of that memory-based instance variable stuff. Okay, so you can't pass information around from one function to another. So one function is going to have a hard time calling another function unless you're passing parameters through to all the other functions. Okay, so object-oriented makes it really easy to extend from a higher level function. In functional programming, there's no reason to extend from a higher level function, a higher level class. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. So let's just start by creating a new, just going to create a new service. We're going to call it animal service.
So are you using service and class interchangeably?
Not necessarily. So service doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a convention. Service, as we use it here internally, is just a reference to some business logic. So it's not a controller, it's not a model, it's not a view, it's just some business logic. So you want to run through some process or workflow, and so it's just a service. Other places will call these helpers or utilities, but it's just some business logic that we're writing. Okay. So in the case of the animal service class, I can write a static method. So you just say self.type, let's say, and we can just put some type. Okay. So if I wanted to call that in our Rails console, how would I go about doing that?
The class, animal service,
Mm-hmm.
dot.
Okay. It is complaining because Rails doesn't like you to just name any random folder. So the easy way to get this to work is just to move it back into models, and it would work just fine. But we're going to try and set it up the correct way, which is just as simple, I believe. Let me go. I always mess up the syntax. You just add an array to your application.rb that says, hey, auto load the files in this other directory too. So if I go to our Rails, yeah, it's like that. So I'm going to take that. So all this is saying is auto load anything that's inside of our config root, which is just Rails intro, and then inside of app, and then inside of services. So animal service is inside of all of that, so it should just work fine.
Did you have just put in helpers?
What's that?
Did you have put in just like the...
We could have just put it into helpers. Helpers, though, is generally not... actually, might... helpers, I think, in Rails is intended to be used for helping your view. So it has like a different convention to it. And so I'm pretty sure, unless they've changed that in the meantime. So then if I go into my Rails console, I can say type and it prints out some type. You see that? So it's just animal service.type, some type.
What if you just moved it to models?
It would do the exact same thing. So if all that moving it to models does is Rails by default auto loads things that are in models, and so it's going to auto load the animal service. So that's all. The only reason for making the change that I did is that it's organizational. It's just for keeping your mind organized. So having services and things that sit on top of tables in the database can be confusing, because you might expect now that I have a table called animal services, and I don't, because that's just supposed to be business logic, whereas I do have a table that's called people, which relates to my person model. So it's completely organizational, but it does help to like just keep your mind straight on what's going on. All right, so I can do that. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about inheritance. Inheritance is generally like I have a larger service that does things that all of its children probably do, but its children maybe do some more things and maybe do a couple things differently. Okay, so for example, you might have a person model, but then you have a boy model and a girl model, and there's going to be slight differences in what they end up doing, anatomical differences, etc. So we're going to do this with animals. So we have an animal service, which is our base class, and then inside of there we're going to have like, I don't know, a lion service. All right. The syntax for extending from a parent in Rails is pretty straightforward, although it might not be obvious, which is just like that. Okay, so this says lion service inherits from animal service. In other languages, you'll see things like extends. Like I think this is what you're doing. Okay, but what we're saying is that we should get all the functions that animal service has in lion service by default. Okay. So in our case, animal service has a static method that's called type that puts out some type. So if I type lion service dot type, what's going to happen? It's going to print some type, right? But I don't have that method in lion service. It's coming from its parent. You just inherit that by default. Okay, it might not be here right now because I might have to reload.
How did you do that click thing where it goes to the other file?
Command. You just command click on the thing. It's one of the beautiful things about RubyMine. You can do this for all kinds of like functions or methods in both TypeScript and in Rails. And if you command click on it, it'll take you where it's defined,
Oh. Nice.
even if it's closed, right? So like, what is this thing? Command click on there. You can do the same thing, like application record, where is that defined? Okay, active record base, where is that defined? It'll actually take you into the gem. This is all the code for active record. Rails uses, there's a couple of ways to extend from a parent, so that's what they're doing here. They're actually extending a whole bunch of different parents. It's called polymorphic inheritance, so it's extending from a bunch of different things. So, and then includes is this whole other thing, similar to a concept called mixins in other languages. We don't use this very often because it's a little difficult mentally to keep your mind wrapped around, but essentially it's the same concept where you're including a whole bunch of functions. Basically, it's copy and pasting functions from these other classes into here. Okay, they're not actually functions. So you'll see they're not actually classes, rather. So you're not extending from them because they're not classes, they're modules, and then these modules, they're called concerns. They're just copy and pasting things into your class. It's mind-blowing. Yeah, we're going to stay away from that for a moment. This is, however, much more consistent with how functional programming works. We'll get into that a little bit because we use a thing called Elixir, a framework called Elixir Phoenix, which is a functional program for some of the functional programming language for some of the things we do. We're sticking with object-oriented at the moment, though. Okay, and we're going to explain some of the object-oriented approaches, or we're going to explain some of the functional approaches that you could do inside of object-oriented, but just choose not to because they're not that nice. That's the other thing. Object-oriented languages will totally let you build incredibly functional code. You can write everything functionally in an object-oriented language, but you generally can't go the other way. If you're using a functional programming language, you can't create objects. Okay, so, but there's been a big swing recently towards functional. I don't know why the kids think it's so cool, but
It's really like fast, isn't it? Like, I mean, in terms of like
that's the claim, right? But you could just as easily create an object-oriented program that does the functional stuff. The reason why it's faster is because it doesn't have to instantiate the objects. It can just run the piece of the code. But the speed thing is like even crazier to me that we're swinging in that direction. Because you know how fast computers are? We'll just pay a little more. It's not like, again, like if you were getting into the minutia of a highly performant machine, like you're trying to build planes that need to be able to make calculations in split seconds, or you're trying to determine spatial calculations and you only have a computer that can be so big, or you're trying to build video games, like there's some reasons to want to do that. And the stuff we do, I don't know, man. It'd be hard to make the argument outside of some very specific circumstances. There are circumstances, but anyway. So, lion service inherits from the animal service. So we already get the function that's there. We can also redefine those functions. So we can say self.type, and we could put puts lion. So now what's going to happen if I rerun that code? Lion. Okay. So even though we inherit from the method, you can override the method. You can also use what's called super. I'm not sure this works in types or in static methods, but I can try. Yeah, it does. Okay. Super just says do whatever my parent class's method would do. And you can put super in the case of Rails anyway, anywhere you want to. So I can call super and then I can put lion. So I could say type some animal. And so now if I rerun this, it's going to say some animal lion. Does both. Okay, so super says called me my parent's function first and then do me. Or I think I can actually just move that. So it'll say lion, like if I just switch them, it should just say lion and then, yep, lion and then some animal. Okay, so it's super just means call my parent's function. Okay. TypeScript doesn't work quite that way when we get there. There's some differences in how super works. You have to call super first every time, which causes some pain, but it's because they're trying to turn what's not really an object-oriented language in JavaScript into an object-oriented language. But anyway. All right, so we have lion service, animal services, all completely static, and there's some usefulness to that. I can do instance stuff too, though, and this is where object-oriented approaches really start to become powerful. So I can say things like eats, puts, drinks, puts, water, energy, packets, 5, okay, something like that. So now my lion is getting some information that's inheriting from the animal. Oh, sorry, put that all in the wrong place. So here. If I go into the animal, we can say in general, our animals are going to eat meat, they're going to drink water, they're going to have energy packets, okay? So then when I go to create my lion, I don't need to do very much. I'm probably going to override type because it's the lion. But outside of that, as long as I'm cool with what animals do in general, then I'm okay. I don't need to change anything else about it. I can get access to that. So if I create a new lion, service. Okay. And then I can say lion.eats, and what is it going to say? Should have said meat. Maybe it didn't get a full reload. There you go. Just didn't reload the whole thing. The lion eats and I get meat. If I do lion drinks, what am I going to get? Okay. If I do lion type, what am I going to get? What's that?
No,
It should be lion. Oh yeah, you did. You already did lion.
It overrides it.
Did it call the parent though? Oh no, it didn't.
It just says lion.
So lion.
Set string.
Type is not defined.
Oh, it's static. You didn't.
Yeah.
It's static.
It's a static method, so why can't I just be more clear about that, Logan?
Or so you can't call a static method from the instance itself.
Right,
You have to
right.
say the name of the class first.
Right, because I said it's a lion.new. So it's an instance of a lion, so I can't call the type because it's a static method. Okay, so I can do lion.type, but I can't do lion service.type. But I can't do lion service.new.type.
Mm-hmm. Be the same thing as lion.type.
Be the same thing as lion.type because I set lion equal to lion.new. Okay. You guys see that? It's just where you can call them. So you can only call the type on an instance of it. You can't call it as a static method. Similarly, I can't say lion.eats, lion service.eats rather. Because eats is an instance method, not a static method, and I'm trying to call it as though it's a static method. If I say lion service.eats, it says, sorry, eats is not a method. But I can say lion service.new.eats. Okay. This is just an exercise in like when you can call static and non-static methods. Okay. All right. Now, one of the things that becomes interesting is I can because I can share these instance variables, I could do something like energy packets equals 5. And then I could say when he eats, I'm going to subtract 1 from each of the energy packets. Right?
What is the indicate?
It just indicates that it's an instance variable, which that just means that it can share it across methods. So normally variables are scoped, it's called. So they're only useful within the context that they're in. In other words, a variable, if it's defined inside of eats, can only be read inside of eats. It wouldn't be readable outside of the method eats. If you want it to be readable outside of the method eats, then you can use an instance variable, and that class, when you have an instance of it, you can access any instance variable across methods. Okay, so this is what starts to create power for instance methods, is that you can actually use the same variable across multiple methods, because what you have is an instance of the lion, and so you have an instance of all these instance variables. So then when I say eats, I can subtract 1 from energy packets every time I eat, and we're going to see that energy package actually goes down. Okay, so I'm going to do something like that. All right, so
you don't have to instantiate this attribute, this attribute in the class?
in the way that I have it set up now, we will. Well, I'm sorry. In the way that I have it set up right now, we're not going to. And that's just because when I call eats, so we're going to start with energy packets of 5. When I call eats, it's going to subtract 1 from energy packets. So it's going to go from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. Energy packets is, you could set it initially. Right now we're setting it as a default. So we're saying energy packets, if it's set, is whatever it is. And if it's not, then it's equal to 5. You could set it. You just have to do include active model, and then we talked about this a little bit last time. Adder accessor energy packets. This would allow me to say animal service.new energy packets : 10, and we're going to start with that. Okay, but we don't necessarily need it at the moment for the way that we're gonna run through this. If that's how you would initialize it. So we're just going to start with this, and then we'll work back to that. All right, so all right, so let's see. 5 equals. Oh, that should be 5. That's 1. Should be setting it. Oh, because I'm calling new over and over again. So when you have an instance, I'm creating a new instance of it every time I run it. But what I really should be doing is saying lion equals lion.new, lion service.new. All right, so if I say lion.energy packets, we have 5. And then if I say lion.eats, we're going to get back 4. And if I eat again, 3. If I eat again, 2. If I eat again, 1. If I eat again, 0. And then we have some not great code, because if I eat again, -1, -2. Okay. But the nice thing about that is, like, it's all shared, right? So I have this way of setting up an initial animal service which says, hey, animals in general have 5 energy packets. And as they eat, they actually, so maybe we want to do something like this, like works. So when he does work, he's using energy. So let's just say that animals in general start with 5, and as they do work, they lose 1 energy packet.
You need the double pipes equals. Like, what does that mean?
Okay, so let me get back to that. So that says by default my energy is going to be 5. It says if energy is not set, then set energy equal to 5. What it's actually saying is, we might have gone through this a little bit. Yeah, it's saying energy equals, it's shorthand, energy or 5. Okay.
So when it starts off at 0, it's not gonna be true.
So energy is nil initially. At energy is nil initially. At nil is a falsy value. I think we went over this a little bit when we did JavaScript stuff. Nil is a falsy value, so it continues to execute and it gets to 5. If energy had been set to 10, then 10 is a truthy value, so energy will be set to 10 and it won't ever get to 5. The usefulness of that is in setting defaults. So if I put this back, now I can use my default of 5, or I can set it to whatever I want it to start with. Okay, so we should be able to try that. Let's see. Doesn't complain about. Line equals new. Doesn't like enter accessor. Just spelled it. Yep. Okay. So if I say lion.energy, what are we going to get right now? 5. Okay. But I could do lion equals lion service dot new energy is 25. Given one expect so.
You need to add energy.
I probably have the syntax wrong because I copy this stuff all the time. That's what we need. Include active adder model. It's like active model, but not the same. Yeah. You think close enough, but it's not. Alright. Initialize constant. Oh, because we probably don't have that gem installed. So yeah. No. Oh, because it's probably coming from one of those. Do active model. Yeah, so we have to, the gem I guess doesn't come by default with just the Rails app that you create, so you just have to add that gem. I'll talk a little bit more about what gems are shortly, but what's it called? Active adder. I think. And install it, just no. Okay. So now if I say lion.energy, we get back 25, not 5. And that's just because, so ignore the gem thing that I did. We'll get back to that in a little bit. That's just installing a package that an external party has so that we can do that include active adder model. But once you do that, the reason why this is happening is because when I do the new, when I call the initializer, I am setting anything that is on this active adder accessor. So in this case, I'm setting energy to 25. This syntax means when somebody calls new with energy colon whatever number, what I want you to do is set by default at energy, because it has the same name, to be whatever they put in. Okay. So in our case, we're setting energy to 25, which means that at energy is becoming 25, which means that when we call energy, at energy is 25. And because it's something and not nil, we use 25 instead of using 5.
Why when we decrement energy is the second energy not added in works?
So if we do works, so let's just start with, what do you think is going to happen if I say lion.works?
24.
Yeah. So it's energy, which is here, which is the instance variable, which we've set to 25 initially, is being now reset equal to whatever energy is, which in our case started at 25, and we're subtracting 1 from it.
I was just wondering why the second one doesn't have the at sign. Like why?
So this one is in reference to the method, right? Energy in Rails references a method. You can call it this way, but in Rails you don't have to put the open close parentheses, which is nice because you can in many cases treat like that syntactical writing of a method and a variable is the same, which just makes things a little prettier when you're doing things. But what this is doing is saying energy equals the result of the energy method, which is this, which is just returning energy.
Could you do?
Okay. So the at, you're accessing the attribute that you said.
Yeah, so at is in reference to the instance variable energy,
Okay.
which we can set by setting an attr accessor of energy and then calling lion service.new energy colon. So we're setting it as we get to start. Energy, so really this could be like energy default if you wanted to. Right? It's just the name of a method that happens to be the same name, and that's useful for convenience for conventions, just this like, oh, these things are all the same, because they are all the same in the end. So
Where did you put 25?
so I right here, when I created my variable lion, I set it equal to lion service.new and then put energy colon 25 in. Or I could put energy colon 45 in, and in this case, if I say lion.energy, what am I going to get back? 45. Okay, and then if I say lion.works, what am I going to get? Yeah. Okay.
So attr accessor is the same as like having a constructor with like a hash.
Yep.
And you take all the ones in the hash and put it into instance variables with the same name.
That's correct. Yeah, that's what I was trying to show last time, is that you can do that actually explicitly in Rails. This is just a convenience method to give you, because it gives you access to the actual thing that you're passing into the constructor too. But you can, there's a def initialize is the constructor that's normally used, and you could pass in something, and then you could do here. Or more specifically, I might be expecting. Some hash that you're passing in. So that's the same thing, if that helps. That's a constructor, it's called. So when I call new, what I pass into the parameters of new, it's a little confusing. What it's actually calling is a method called initialize with those parameters, and then it's setting an instance variable equal to the hash energy thing. That's actually, this is literally what's happening if we were to follow the code back. Okay, it's just shorthand to be able to do it this way. Okay, you just need a couple examples of this though, and to use it, and you'll be like, oh, okay, I did that before. I need to just go copy and paste it, and then I can add the new stuff in. All right, so but. Line works, right? We can just go through and it just, that's it. Right, until we run out of energy and then maybe do something. But we may very well have it that lions get less energy than other types of animals, right? So by default, animals have 5 pieces of energy, but lions, oh, well, how about this even? Lions, maybe when they work harder. So they lose energy faster. So maybe with lions, each time they work, they lose 2 units of energy. So how would I make it so that lions lose 2 pieces of energy every time they work, whereas animals in general only lose 1?
Just copy paste the DevWorks line and decrementify too.
See that? So it's just you're inheriting. So we still get all the other stuff. We still get what energy is. We still get the adder accessor of energy. We still get the drinks water, right? But now when we work as a lion, so now what are we going to see when I do lion works?
43.
43. And then 41. Okay. Let's see. So you hopefully are starting to see where this can be very powerful, because now you can dry up your code, don't repeat yourself, a lot more. Because you can think about how can I create a base model that does all of these things where most of the time, like 80% of the time, I want the energy to be 5 or the works to be -1. But sometimes I might want to have a different class that overrides that and says, actually, I want it to be -2 for works. Okay. So but all I have to do is overwrite the one function. I don't have to overwrite everything. Okay. So most of my code goes here, and then I do this, and then like maybe I have another one that's the lamb service. But the lamb service, maybe I just override type. See, so I don't have to write much new code. Now I can build lots and lots of animals. I don't have to write much code. And if I want to add new functionality, I don't now have to go through the lamb service and the lion service and the tiger service and the elephant service. You just put an animal. Okay. Now we're going to talk about why that's cool in some respects relative to functional languages. Okay. If I wanted to do this functionally, in other words, I want to use all static methods and no instance methods so that I don't have to load the whole instance up, which is the performance gain that you get. How would I accomplish this same task with static methods? So we can do self.works, okay? Okay. So now there's a problem though. We can actually run this. So if I do, and I do, so first of all, so how do I call works now for a lion? Just think back to what's the difference between calling type and drinks? So there's lion service.type, but I can't call lion service.new.type, right? I can call lion service.new.drinks, but I can't call lion service.drinks. Okay. So if I'm going to call works now, I have to say lion service.works. I can't say lion service.new.works. So if I do that, when I say lion service.works, what is at energy going to be at that point?
Just nil.
It's not,
So the first thing that it runs into is energy. Energy, it says, is not a variable because it's not. We were trying to reference a function. But remember when we talked about this before, you can't reference static functions from instance methods, and you can't reference instance methods from static methods, or if I got that wrong. You can't cross. You have to do one or the other. So that means if I want to access this energy, then what do I need to do to this energy method?
self-dot.
It needs to be a self-dot. Okay, so let's see what happens when we do that. Lion service.works. Actually did get something to happen. I'm real confused about how that happened, but it's because we have this. It is still, so energy is still, yeah, it's still an attribute. it's still being set equals to 5 when we call energy. Okay. But I don't.
Oh, because we actually still alive.
I think you should be able to do that. That's craziness if that's what they let you do. Because then what's the difference even?
Well, it's because right now you're in the animal service instead of the lion service.
Yeah. Oh, because we overrode it. Okay. That still shouldn't. Yeah, it's just getting worse. I'm very confused by that. That should not be working. Animal service is self.works, it's a static method. Energy, it's calling energy. It must be, but it shouldn't be able to share the instance method around like that. Maybe Rails does some weird crap. Okay. Well, let me make the point then, and I'll go back and do some research and try and figure out why this is happening. You shouldn't be able to share instance methods around like that. You should have to do something that is more like this. Instance variables. You can't share instance variables around because you don't have an instance. You're just calling a function. That being the case, when I say lionservice.works, it's going to call energy minus 1. Well, what is energy at this point? In this case, it's actually going to be a reference to this method, energy, which is going to return 5. Actually, that's probably what's happening. It's returning 5, which still works. So this returns 5 like that, okay? And then, so we're going to say energy minus 1, which is going to be 4. So this is why this is working. It's not setting the instance variable, though. Okay. So if I do that, we should see now. So we get 4 every single time. Because there's no instance variable, there's no method that's getting updated every time. It's just calling the function again. So if we wanted it to actually update every time, how would we do that? What's that?
Would you remove that?
So you can remove the self and we go back to the instance method. That's how to solve it. But if I wanted to do it using totally functional programming.
You put a static variable at the top.
You
Or,
could put a static variable at the top but if it's globally defined. So functional programming, generally speaking, every time I call it, I want it to do the same thing. So if I had a sort of globally defined or higher level defined variable that we were changing over and over again, each time I called it, the function does something different because there's this you're creating a pseudo instance variable. Like you could do it that way, but you're trying to approach it from an object-oriented perspective. How do we do it without an instance variable, without a variable that we're setting inside of the class?
Just gonna keep passing it. All right, so we can't store it, so we just need to keep passing it around, like it can't sit.
Yeah.
So just using parameter.
Yeah. So you could pass in a parameter. Like previous energy.
Just chain it all together.
Okay. So we'll say that by default it's no. Okay, so if it gets called without anything, it's going to set it to no. Okay, still getting 4 every time because we're not passing a parameter in to works. Okay. So we're calling it every time. It does exactly what we expect it to. Every time you call lion service.works without a parameter, you get back 4. Okay, that's what we're looking for. That's what functional programming suggested you're supposed to do. It's all good. If we pass in something like 5, we're going to get back 4. If we pass in something like 4, we're going to get 3. If we pass in something like 3, we're going to get 2, etc. Okay. So, but if every time that I call this, I want it to work like it did before, where I'm constantly decrementing. How do I do that process?
People like chain or recursively and get it to stop at 0 or something.
Yeah, basically. So like when I'm writing code that's calling works now, I have to set the result set each time to a variable. So lion energy equals lion service.works, let's say. So that's 4 now. So now from this point forward, I can say lion energy equals works lion energy. What is lion energy at this moment in time? 4. So we're going to call lion service.works with the lion energy, which is 4, which is going to return what? Which then lion energy is then going to be what? And then if I call this again, 2 and then 1. All right, so that's how you would do it functionally. Okay, that's how you would use static methods. That's how you would do it functionally, and it works, and it's okay, and it's faster because you don't have to load the instance up, so you don't have the instance in memory. But it's a lot more verbose, and it takes a lot more work on the other side and think about. Okay, so that's why we generally prefer to use instance. Even in cases where you could write it as a static method, we generally end up writing them as instances just because there's some usefulness and understanding of what's happening if you don't. Okay. All right, but that's all kinds of stuff around classes. Next time we'll start to get into actual controllers. We'll go from there, but I'll push this stuff up to give you some things to look at. And this stuff is useful because as soon as you start to get into our code base, you're going to start to see that we do this all the time. Hopefully this will help you to understand why we're doing what we're doing. All right. If we can, Sky, do you want to start since you probably have to go first?
Yeah.